Hi there, and welcome to the last dance online talk for the 2015 season. It's been a great year. About a year ago, we had our first online session, and since then, we have been working to gather together a community. Today, we will present an xBlock that we have recently released, and we have here a feedback panel, and we'll have some discussion also from the audience. So we're really excited to get started. So Shri, do you want to go ahead and start projecting the slides?
Yeah, the slides are already projecting.
Oh, great. Okay, so first let me just review a little bit of history for you. So as I mentioned, the first online meeting that we had for dance was a brainstorming session where we gathered together interested community members to talk about their priorities for support of social interaction in MOOCs. And from that meeting, three goals emerged. One was that we would be able to incorporate some kind of structured support for collaboration in MOOCs based on the work in the computer-supported collaborative learning community on scripted collaboration. Also, we wanted to see more group knowledge construction, so not just help seeking to get through assignments, but substantive discussion about material and group ideation and building on one another's ideas in an intensive way. And also the idea of mobile access was discussed at that time. And since then we have continued our discussion with platform developers like Piotr here, and also MOOC instructors like Eric and Erland, who will be giving us feedback from their instructor and course developer perspective in just a bit. Yes, so let's move on to the next slide. So we are going to, Shri, you seem to be advancing the slides very quickly. Can you please go backwards?
Sorry about that. Are we on the right slide now?
Yes, we are. Okay, so we're going to talk for a little while. In fact, Shri, my PhD student, who has been most actively involved in the development of our xBlock recently, will be giving an overview of the design rationale and a demo. And we also have here other members of our team to pipe in as necessary. And then we will have our feedback panel. And we have three members of our panel: Piotr Mitros from edX, who is a platform development expert and also just plays a very central role in the development of the edX platform, and in fact invented the first version of the edX platform himself. And then we have Eric Klopfer from MIT, and he's a MOOC instructor, as I mentioned. He will be talking from his instructor and course designer developer perspective, and similarly Erland Stevens from Davidson College will be playing a similar role on our feedback panel. And we have invited our panelists to be as critical as desired, because this is really a session where what we hope is that we will start to take stock of where we're at, what we've accomplished so far, but really what are our goals going forward. And so in some ways we have this xBlock that we offer as a kind of first product that can be used on the platform. At least it can be used in whatever local instance of OpenEdX you may have. In terms of the production platform, there are some issues about compatibility that still need to be dealt with. For example, that it requires a database. So that's an issue that needs to be discussed. But we wanted to make something available that would be concrete, that would be a boundary object for our continued discussion, so that you know, to give something really to criticize, actually, that the people can say that we really want X, Y, and Z that you're not providing, or this is very inconvenient for us. You know, we think we'll get better feedback from having something out there that people can look at and that we can discuss. So that's really what today's session is about. So don't be shy. Any of you out in the audience should be able to submit questions, and so then we'll be able to entertain those questions as well. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Shri? Great. Okay, so I would just like to point you to our dance website, And there we have updated on the resources page the entry for our dance xBlock that we're talking about today. You'll see there a link to our GitHub repository with the latest version that we will be demoing today. And there's also a walkthrough document if you'd like to work through the demo yourself locally. You can get to the running instance that we have through that link. And also there are some other documents that talk about more of the technical foundation and the design rationale, and some of that we will be talking about today. Next slide, Shri. Great. Also, we have added a thread to our Google group where you can also post questions, comments, and feedback on what you see today or anything that you may see in the running demo as you play with it on your own or in the documents that I have just pointed to. So please feel free to participate there. Next. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Shri, who is going to talk to us about this xBlock design and also show the demo. So why don't you just take it over, Shri?
Hey everyone, and thanks Kellen for introducing the speakers and the rationale behind the talk. So I'd like to start by motivating the development behind and the ideas that we had while developing this discussion forum. So discussion forums are central to the MOOC experience because it's really the only space where students can talk to one another and interact with the course instructor. So if you consider the community as a key resource of a MOOC, then the discussion forum plays a central role in these community interactions. However, both setting up and managing these discussion forums can be a frustrating experience for both course developers as well as students. So it's often hard to have functional conversations with thousands of students, and it's hard to find content in ever-growing threads. So part of this issue is that there are several different kinds of conversations that one can have, two of which are called authoritative and discursive. So authoritative conversations are meant to converge to a single answer. So websites like Stack Overflow, where there is one correct answer to every question, are examples of this kind of conversation. Discursive conversations, on the other hand, are meant for exchange of ideas and are not meant to converge on a single correct answer. In most such conversations, there need not be a correct answer even. So most discussion forums are biased towards authoritative conversations. There are some issues with this kind of discussions because when a question is posed, students answer the question without referring to each other's answer and answer the question directly. So there's a lack of transactivity. Moreover, reaching the correct answer means the end of the discussion. So the original discussion forum, the edX discussion forum was biased towards authoritative discussions, but recently in an effort to signal to students that there are different kinds of these conversations that you can have, edX introduced this feature for distinguishing between discussion and a question. So really where we are coming from in terms of a theoretical perspective is Vygotsky's view of social interaction as being central to the learning process. And this has been proved in a computer-supported collaborative learning contest by various studies showing the positive impact of collaboration on cognitive processes. Also, there has been research on the social effects of commitment to the course, including a study that we did at our lab on the effects of social interaction on attrition and commitment to the course. So we showed that social engagement actually leads to better commitment to the course and decreased attrition. Even so, taking an online class is mostly an isolated experience, and participants are not feeling a sense of community because the current discussion forum is not meant to leverage the social engagement around learning. The proposed xBlock will solve these problems in various ways. So I would be referring back to these problems that I've raised as and when I show the solutions. So the basic structure of the discussion forum is a nested structure. So we have a administrator designated categories of forums which have forums within them, and each of these forums then has posts or polls. So, and these posts can be of two types, a thread starter, which is called a topic post, and replies to that post, which continue the discussion. So I'll now take you through a feature walkthrough of the forum xBlock. As we can see here, there are two categories of forums. There's the homeworks forum and the social space. So within each of these categories, there are two forums each. So there is homework 1 and homework 2. And then under the social space, we have introductions and in the news, where we students can share articles about news articles relevant to the contents of the course. The discussion itself is similar to an infinite scrolling Reddit blog, so it provides better support for discursive conversations. Quoted reply allows students to reply to specific posts and build off each other's ideas, so this is a support for transactivity. There are various social cues that I'd like you to notice throughout the discussion forum. So on the home page, you can see summary statistics about the number of registered users on the forum, the number of users who are currently online, and total number of posts. So this serves as a useful indicator of the size of the community, the users that are part of it, as well as an indicator of concurrent participation levels. This light social awareness is what enables synchronous interaction. The online indicator indicates whether a user is currently online. This tells students if they can expect an immediate response from that user. Instead of responding to the user's post on the forum, the user can send a personal message to the other user, which in this case is a form of synchronous interaction between the users. So as I said earlier, there are two forms of posts that may be created, topic posts and polls. Polls can be used at the end of the course, say, to gather feedback from the participants. Polls can also be used week to week to gather feedback. Administrators of this forum can also choose to make the option of creating a poll available to all students, so students themselves can create polls. So topic post creation supports basic formatting and markup. There's also source code highlighting for major languages using the Python Pigments library. Attachments can be used to share documents and images, and students can subscribe to these topics to receive email updates whenever there's an update. So one thing I'd like to highlight is the social recommendation process. So the social recommendation process actually supports meaningful social interaction and community building. It requires two things. Firstly, student participation data has to be exported into a representation that will serve as an input to the recommendation engine. In our case, we have exported the MySQL database store that DjangoBB uses to our own DiscourseDB representation. This DiscourseDB representation is then used for various applications. So one application that we developed in our published work is for determining potential role models, and another application that I'll be demoing today is for determining potential helpers. So as a second step, the request for social support that's initiated on the platform has to be passed to the recommendation algorithm, and the results from the recommendation algorithm have to be passed back to the platform and utilized by it. So I'll be illustrating this in the quick help demo that I'll be showing later. So the basic architecture of the social recommendation engine looks like this. The MySQL data store is converted to, in this case, the MySQL data store is called the dump, and it's converted to the DiscourseDB representation. The recommendation algorithm then uses this representation for offline training. And when a social support request is initiated from the platform, the recommendation algorithm receives this request and performs an online recommendation, which is passed back to the platform for action. While you're looking at this architecture, I'd like you to think about how different applications, not just recommending helpers or identifying role models, but really any kind of social recommendation can fit into this architecture. So one such use case which we have implemented for this demo is the quick help request. So you'll see a request help button displayed next to each topic. A student's first line of defense usually is to create a new topic thread, either for getting help or starting a discussion. This is suboptimal because often responses take too long or they never come. The quick help request is one option that allows forum users to proactively request help from up to 3 users, actually any number of users, but we are currently restricting it to 3, who are likely to be able to answer the question as identified by the social recommendation algorithm, which I just discussed. So the quick help request button allows each student to pick out, each student to send help requests to users who are most likely to be able to answer the question. Another advantage of the quick help request button is that other students who have the same question can use the quick help request button to request for help. So this actually conveniently reduces the duplication of content and increases the number of eyeballs on the same question. So pressing the button triggers a request to the social recommendation algorithm that looks like this. So there are 3 users listed, and the user can select one or more of these users and send a request for help. Each of those users then receive a mail with a link to the discussion forum, which they can then follow and answer the question. So I'll be demoing this later as well. So as I said earlier, when you were looking at the social recommendation architecture, really any custom recommendation can fit into this pipeline. Essentially, the recommendation pipeline has 3 components: the data infrastructure, the modeling framework, and the recommendation. So the data infrastructure that we are using is DiscourseDB, and DiscourseDB already has converters implemented for Coursera data, edX data, Wikipedia, and many other sources of discourse. In addition, for this particular forum xBlock, we are providing converters. So the data infrastructure part should be taken care of if you're using data from any of these sources. The modeling and the recommendation portions will depend on the end use case. So for example, in the ProSolo use case, which we recently did, we modeled potential role models. And in the quick help intervention, we modeled likely help givers. So the recommendation portion is also driven by the modeling. So for most use cases, other than the one illustrated in the current xBlock, both the modeling process and the UI assets have to be changed. DiscourseDB is set to provide analytics support in the future. So this can be leveraged for the modeling process. But the modeling code that produces recommendation is built to take data in that format. So if you want to leverage the code that we already have, if the data is already in DiscourseDB format, then you can do that. New forms of social recommendation use cases other than these will require extension to the modeling work based on work that we have published earlier. So UI assets need to be modified for based on the requirements of the end application. So for server-side functionality, we will need to modify the Python code, and for client-side functionality, we need to modify the appropriate HTML files. Our goal really here is to make this integration more modular so that developers can develop their own social recommendation applications using this. So that will be one of our goals going forward. So from an administration perspective, the setup and structuring of these discussion forums is easy and straightforward. Administrators can create categories of forums, forums within those categories, and then topics and posts before the start of the course or during the course, depending on how the course is structured. They can initiate polls and create new forums from week to week. Another useful feature is role-based access control. So administrator can create user groups for providing this kind of access control. So the idea here is that different kinds of users, say community TAs, course TAs, instructors, and the students will have a different sets of permissions. So I think I'll stop sharing the slides now and quickly get into the demo. Yeah, before that. So the user and content search options allow us to wade through the large number of discussion posts. So users can search for other users using the user search option, or they can search for other posts either by author or by content of the posts. All right, so let me quickly get into the demo. Can everyone see my screen? All right. So when you log into the discussion forum, you can basically see the kind of structure that I was talking about earlier. So we have the category of the forum, and within that category, we have 4 different forums: homework 1, homework 2, homework 3, and homework 4. And within the category social space, we have 2 forums: introduction and in the news. So each of these forums are structured into topics, which are basically discussion starters. And within each of these topics, we have posts. So I'd like to highlight this feature below. So there are, it shows the number of users who are currently registered, as well as the number of users who are online. On the right, we have some summary statistics about the total strength of the community that actually uses the discussion forum. The search option allows you to conveniently search based on author or keyword, and you can sort the results based on most recent, or you can show it using the thread starter or using the post. And yeah, so I'd like to quickly highlight the help request option now. So this user has posted a help a thread which hasn't been answered, so he'd like to request for help. So when I click request quick help, you can see that there are 3 different users who are selected for offering help to this user. So the content of the discussion is also embedded in the help request, and I'll select myself. Yeah. So while that request is going out, we'll look at some of the other aspects of the forum. So creation of a new topic thread is on the right hand top corner. So you can create a new topic. So here, since the option of creating both a poll and a post is provided to me, I can either create a poll, or if I go down here, I can create a post. The profile option helps me control my profile, change my password and things like that. And another important thing that I'd like to highlight here is the privacy option. So users can choose to receive personal messages using a form on the website, or to expose their email address directly, or to disallow both. So let me log in as another user. So as you can see in this case, someone actually replied to the help request. Okay, so Carolyn actually replied to the help request. So it says, I see your link, I'd be happy to help. Yeah. So the idea here is that this kind of synchronous um, interaction between the users can be enabled. So the online indicator here shows me that both these users are online, so I can personally message them and expect an immediate response. Another portion I'd like to highlight is the administration. So the administration is straightforward. So as I was saying earlier, the role-based access control portion can be set up here. So users can be added to groups, and then these groups can be given permissions. And we can also add forums here, categories of forums, and polls within those forums before the start of the course or anytime during the course. Let me get back to my slides. So that was it for the quick demo. So Carolyn, can you take over?
Sure. Okay. Well, now that we have, there's an echo. Now that we have shown you what we have to offer today, we will turn it over to our feedback panel to go ahead and give their feedback and kick off the discussion. So I think what we'd like to do is have each of our panelists just give a short feedback, and then we'll have a more interactive discussion. And excuse me, also include questions from the audience if they submit some. So let's start with Piotr.
Thank you very much. I am actually, would you mind muting? There's a little bit of an echo. Thank you. I'm very excited to see this developing. I'll actually give a few requests on a kind of very high level, and I think you're going to kill me for these. But I think that there's one question is actually demonstrating the effectiveness of techniques specifically like these in the context of digital learning environments like edX. So the references on the page early on, one of them was Vygotsky, which is ancient educational philosopher, and that in turn led to a reference from 1971 about social learning, which is not very evidence-based. There were a few references that were, I think it'd be very helpful to sort of come up with a way as we're designing this to say, this is the cognitive process we want in the students, this is how it helps learning, and then eventually tie that back to the platform decisions rather than just simply starting with social helps. Because social, we know that social that is well structured helps. Social that is poorly structured probably doesn't help. We have surveys of literature, and it'd be very sort of helpful to say, this is the kind of process we want, this is how we tie it together, and tie that a little bit more. The second point that I'll actually push back on were statements that the feedback in discussion forums takes too long and sometimes never comes. That is true in discussion forums today because they are discussion forums. So we had CQA forums. I think I mentioned this in the first edX talk. That time was 12 minutes to response, median time to response, and the response rate was 92%. So that may come. I think the third point that I'll push back on a little bit is also, well, actually I'll leave it on those 2 points. It'd be very interesting to actually get your feedback on a little bit more build up a little bit more from CSCL theory to why this is the most effective set of techniques. I think from there I'll move on to perhaps, I guess Eric's next. Or you may want to respond.
Well, just very briefly, on the time to response, I think it depends largely on the critical mass, and of course there's a huge difference in population across different MOOCs, and I've been involved in a few different ones so far, and I have seen huge differences on this front depending upon the number of students who are involved and also the number of instructors who are involved and kind of how involved those instructors are. I do recall having a discussion with you about the case that you mentioned, and I do think that there is something about how the forums are organized, and
Yes.
and I like your idea of a QA forum that might be structured in a way that would, highlight the need better and channel people's effort a little bit more efficiently, and that could be, work much better. So I am certainly not knocking any of that, and I think that they're all things that we should consider. But I do think that this idea of inclusion of social recommendation in order to attract more attention to places where responses have not been forthcoming would be more valuable in courses that are small. Where there's
I absolutely agree. This is very valuable. Just so we're on the same page, you asked for critical feedback.
Oh yeah.
I love the work.
So responding. Yeah, so, but I think these are issues that need to be discussed. As for the literature survey, yeah, I mean, rather than try to do it off the top of my head, I think yes, there are definitely very recent references to empirical studies that that they could be mentioned, and maybe we should actually post something like that to the dance website as a resource.
I'll say that it's actually less a question of mentioning it. It's more a question of when we get those references, we can start to extract best practices. Mickey Chi had a beautiful survey on social learning in the ICAP framework, although not very well referenced in some ways, as I would have liked to actually trace back some of the, well, that's a longer story, but starting in places like that, figure out which things work, which ones didn't, what the best practices were, and what the cognitive processes were, and less for the sake of, checking off, hey, we know all the prior work, and more for building on top of it and trying to integrate those same cognitive processes. That I think would be the next major step on this very nice tool.
Yeah, and in fact, on Mickey Chi's ICAP framework, we have applied that to a MOOC discussion forum from a course where there was a pre-post test to see if we would see the same association between levels of cognitive richness in the kinds of contributions students were making and how much they learned in the course, and we do see the same relationship that she has discussed in that survey article. And so I think there really is a nice connection between that prior work and design principles for MOOCs, and I do agree that it would be very valuable to this community to have sort of best practices with an empirical justification. And so we have started to try to provide more pointers into the literature through linking in our Google Scholar page with discussion research related to MOOCs, and I think that some survey articles made more prominent and best practices, that would be a good thing to offer. So thank you so much for that feedback, and we will have more discussion about it. I just wanted to respond briefly, and now let's move over to Eric.
Thanks. Well, I'm gonna take a second to respond to those last set of responses, which is, so thinking about some of the metrics. Certainly as we think about some of the metrics for participation in our courses, there's a few things that we think are really important. So first of all, the discussion forums in our courses are basically the place where people participate. There are not problem sets. There are not, there's other things that people are doing there in terms of projects, but the way they sort of display those projects is all through the forum. So it's the central place for activity within our course. And I think, so one of the things that we look at is not just, are people answering questions, but who is participating and what are the cues that they're using to that sort of increase their participation. And so I think some of the things that you're thinking about here in terms of those social interactions and time to response and sort of giving some sense of a smaller community who you can interact with when you're sort of asking those questions and being able to identify specific people. I think those are some things that we have some evidence that those will lead to increased participation and sort of making some people feel comfortable and increasing participation, which is a very important metric for us. Because there's lots of people who sort of quote participate by simply watching some of the videos, which is a legitimate form of participation, but it's sort of clearly at a different level than the level of actually what I would call taking the course. Sort of that's watching the course. So if you want to do the work, you have to really be comfortable in the forums. So in terms of the questions, one of the questions I have about the questions and asking those specific questions is there's many different kinds of questions that someone could ask, some of which are more sort of course procedures kinds of questions, like where do I find the reference to this last thing, or are we supposed to be working on A or B this week? There's questions of like, what was the answer to problem number 72? There's questions about that are more like discussions, which are like, has anybody used any of the 5 tools that were discussed this past week in the course, and what did you think about those? So there's sort of questions that sort of maybe sort of more discussions, and so being able to sort of think about how you might categorize those questions so that they can be farmed out in the proper way, or sort of advise to the student about where they might be pushing them and where they might be most appropriately be situated within the forums would be really helpful, because I think that the immediate feedback from trying to ask somebody a question and get a response would be people could take advantage of that too much and not sort of have some of that discussion in the forums, which might sort of inhibit some of that social learning because you're really just trying to get an answer to a question, and could be it could be a mechanical Turk sort of answering that question for you somewhere else, as opposed to a course participant who you're really trying to interact with. And it also doesn't sort of leave a trail necessarily that other people can follow, and that's important to think about. If everybody's asking, where the reference in video number 6 was, you want to be able to have that asked and answered once. I think that another challenge I see with the way that the questions get farmed out is there's no disincentive to me checking all 3 boxes for who to ask the question to. So why would I not just always give you check the maximum number of boxes you give me in terms of the people who I'm asking to? There has to be something about maybe my reputation as a question asker as well as a question answer that's in there. I saw some of those stats on the people who answer those questions, and I think that's important. But maybe something about me as a question asker as well. That relates to the sort of more general. I see you have a profile that's in there, and that's something that I know that a lot of folks have asked in edX, and there's some limited ability to do that now. But it's something that we also had to some limited extent within our forums as well, and I think that's a really important aspect. It gives some, yours was some basic information, but being able to sort of have things about reputation and number of posts and things like that I have in there can help develop some of that profile and identity that I think that goes on in there. And I think that identity is something that people, whether it doesn't have to be your real identity, it can be your course identity. But people, I think the question answerers want to be able to have that, so I want to have some perhaps public acknowledgement for the questions that I answer, and that's something a lot of those support forums have ultimately capitalized on. So people who really like to answer questions, they develop their reputation. That's public. That's something that they maybe even post somewhere else how helpful they were in that space. So being able to have that on the question answerer side, and I think probably even more in the discussion space, just being able to show that I'm an active discussion participant, and that helps give some evidence as to whether you should respect my answer or discussion that's going on there. And then having some of my profile that's attached to that as well, optionally, so that I can say something about myself. Again, who I am may matter in that case. Let me think about anything else here. The last thing I'll say is about discovery. So that's something that in our early research on forums, in terms of what people wanted and what people were using, discovery of content is really challenging when the course gets large, and so maybe most recent posts are not the most things that are most relevant to me, but other kinds of things around that. So whether it's about searching by keyword can help, but there's other ways of most active topics, whether it's topics that have the most participants. There may be certain keywords that I want to follow or tags that I want to follow. You can think even about recommendation there. If I'm sort of being able to rate things as I see them, it might be highly rated things, and then maybe it might even recommend things that I've rated highly. Things are like that elsewhere. So some of those things already exist. So like I know some of the stuff we've done, you can have sort of thumbs up, and you can sort of sort by some of that. There's no sort of intelligent recommendation based on that, but that would be a nice direction as you're thinking about ways that you can filter that, so that a large forum becomes smaller to me as I start to see things that I think are more relevant to me.
So I think that was a lot of really useful feedback. Thank you very much. Really, really interesting. One thing I'd like to highlight from what you said was there's a real difference between people who come to the forums to ask a question, and in that case, if the question is answered once, then it doesn't need to keep being asked. But when there are discussion questions that the interaction between the students is meant to lead to their learning, it's not necessarily the case that once that discussion happens once in the class that you don't want the other students in groups to be able to have a similar experience sharing their ideas and building their ideas on each other. And so it's important, and I think that that was part of the motivation for the different spaces, the question answer space versus discussion space, to try to make room for those two kinds of very different interactions and how they relate to learning. There's also the idea that there can be a purpose for the discussion forum and then other kinds of discussion opportunities that might be introduced, for example, asynchronous interaction. So, but I think that none of these things are necessarily instead of reputation systems and other common ways of helping people identify content that's interesting to them. We have seen, though, that despite the fact that there are upvoting and downvoting and tagging that are part of discussion forums that are even part of platforms that are out there now, people still do on their feedback surveys sometimes complain that they nevertheless are not able to find their place in the discussion forums, and sometimes that it is a little bit overwhelming and that they post and they feel like they're talking into the void because they put this very thoughtful contribution and yet they didn't get the response that they were after. And these kinds of observations are really what drive us to consider that there might be some additional support beyond that. I'd also like to point out that my PhD student, Iris Howley, she just recently finished her dissertation and has moved on to the School of Education at Stanford. She, in her dissertation, was looking at reputation systems and how they affect help seeking. And what she saw was that there are ways in which people can feel a bit threatened by making their help requests public and sort of displaying their weakness in front of others. And she did find that affected how many helpers, for example, people would invite to their threads. But you know, there can be the positive side that as well established from empirical studies that these reputation systems do improve the quality on some dimensions of the kind of content that gets posted to discussion forums. But her point was to investigate the possible negative impact based on evaluation apprehension, especially when you consider help seeking per se, where people do sometimes feel apprehensive to, again, show their weakness publicly. So I think that there are these tensions that should be considered, and the questions are big, and we're not in any way claiming that we have the answer. But I think all these kinds of issues, Eric, that you have raised are things that we want to continue to balance and consider and trade off with one another as we think what would be the ultimate design. So we will come back to this discussion. I think it's extremely interesting. But first, I'd like to give Erland a chance to pipe in.
So my course is a little less, it's a little less discussion-based, and it's much more content-driven. So the students who come to the discussion board in my course, I typically see that they're looking for answers in general. You do encounter some of the cases where students are sharing an article that they read recently, but a lot of it is, I need help on question 5. Somebody please help me. My frustration in my course is I know that I have a wealth of students in there who are actually very talented in the material, and yet they never visit the discussion board because they don't need help. They come in, they do the content, and then they leave. So the idea of having a tool that will encourage those students to sort of share their knowledge, and frankly, I benefit from a lot of that knowledge, that is really appealing to me. So to see these kinds of ideas bundled into this particular xBlock in a way that has a fairly clean interface. I think it's an interface that anybody who's poked around on the internet has seen this type of format, so people will be comfortable with it. There won't be much of a learning curve to it. I think that's important. As we talk about community, I think the length of the course becomes an important factor. So my particular course is about 7 weeks, and I really feel that in 7 weeks, students get to know the regular posters. I mean, you do know who you're dealing with on the discussion board. It'd be interesting to see if in shorter courses, like 2 week courses, how does the community evolve, and can that happen in that short a time, or if it does, what is the limit to that? I am not an education theory person, so I have a hard time hanging with the other panelists in their level of discussion. But my interests are mostly as a person who runs a MOOC. How easy is this to manage? As you start creating different directories, how challenging is that going to be to keep on top of the different discussions that are going on? And there are probably easy answers to that. Maybe in week 3, if you want to shut down the thread for homework number 1, you just say, okay, this is not going to be moderated by the course staff, but we'll leave it open. So I think there are some easy solutions to that. But the amount of work as you monitor different directories would be a concern for me. I don't think that's insurmountable. I do like the social cues. Knowing that other people are there, I think, is important. When my course closes up, I really feel like you are saying goodbye to a community. This community has been created, and then it's over, and it kind of bums you out that it ends. But that's fantastic that you can achieve that through these courses. And so a tool that allows more types of engagement. I'd love to see students be able to interact in their native language, have special areas where students can communicate in their native language, and break out into different groups. Whether you're an educator, in my course in medicinal chemistry, maybe there is a subgroup of patent attorneys, and so to give people spaces to have their own discussions. Of course, that wouldn't be directly content driven, but for people just to have conversations that really are very hard to manage in the current forum tool. My courses tend not to be that huge. My biggest one has been 15,000, and the last time it ran it was 5,000. So the current edX tool is manageable, but having a richer feature set clearly would be fantastic.
That's great. Thank you very much, Erland. I'd just like to point out, I do think it's going to increasingly be an issue that there are many places for instructors to keep track of in the discussion forums as the functionality expands. So, for example, you, Erland, I know in your course experimented with using Teams, which is a new feature in the edX platform that can be turned on, in which different groups actually have their own kind of discussion forum space. And so it creates another place that the instructor might want to keep tabs on. And so I do agree, it would be useful to have ways of reporting back to instructors what's going on in those spaces, maybe, so to help them manage that attention better. And that's something we've thought about, but it isn't part of our current design, but I think it could certainly be something that we would incorporate later. But I also would like to point out that it's part of our goal to use the students as resources a little bit better, because actually, as you noticed in your course, people came with a variety of different expertise, and they had things to offer as well that were valuable both to you, that you mentioned actually while we were just chatting informally before this, but also to each other. And so one of the goals that we have, and again, we don't claim that we have gotten there yet, but what we are continuing to strive for is to create affordances that would help students use each other as resources better, which reduces then the burden on the instructor staff. So, one way that people have tried to do this is to get students who did really well in a previous run of their course to serve as TAs. Then you have a much larger number of TAs and more resources. But I think even among the students that are taking a course currently, they have things to offer one another. And we see this in our collaborative learning studies in classrooms as well, that students benefit just from having those interactions with one another when they're structured appropriately, when they draw from and fit into the curriculum appropriately. And I think this is partly what Eric was saying about what he was trying to achieve also in his course. So in the time that we have left, I'd like to give you all the opportunity to respond to one another. I'm sure that there has been a little bit of that so far. So why don't you just raise your hand if you'd like to be called on next. I also saw Piotr had some comments in the chat, so he might be the next choice. And also Gaurav, if you want to just raise your hand if you see also a question from the audience. So who would like to jump in?
So I would like to call out a question which I can see in the chat. So someone has asked, like, and maybe Sri can answer that question, whether the course designers who use this xBlock change UI as it's served up by Django BB.
Okay, so one of our immediate next steps is modifying the UI assets to conform to edX UX standards. So it can be done. Django BB itself offers templating options that we can use to do this. But the xBlock currently, as in we don't have an interface through the xBlock that you can use to change the UI assets. If that's a requirement that comes up, it can be done. But it's using the Django BB's templating service is also fairly straightforward.
Other questions and comments? Oh, Erland has his hand up. Yes.
What so do you envision this replacing the discussion board? If someone were to implement this, would you try to disable the discussion tab within the course and run this, or have them both concurrently, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense as a question. So yes, we well, currently this is a proof of concept. It's an xBlock that somebody could drop into their course if they wanted to. And again, as I mentioned, for now, it's not been approved to be released on the production platform for edX. But for people who have their own local Open edX instance, they would be able to use this xBlock, and then they could disable the regular edX discussion forum. Our real goal, though, is to work with edX, partnering with them on the design of a new discussion forum that would have what we as a community decide is what instructors who use the edX platform would like to include in their courses. So it wouldn't be that it competes with the edX discussion forum, but that it was our goal always to partner with edX on the design and development. And so this is our first step. We have been working on our ideas, and again, like I said, and also back to what Piotr was saying earlier, this is really a boundary object. It's putting something out there for discussion. It's making it concrete so that we can get more feedback, but ultimately we think we'll probably scrap it and working directly with edX build something even better than this, better than what they have, something that meets our goals.
What I will say is that I do want to see competition here. I do want to see. I don't believe that there is a single. Carol, you're getting a lot of echo. Thank you. What I would like to see is a lot of different social interactions, because when you're in a physics course, you often see peer instruction in classrooms. MIT has a program called ESG, which is about student mentoring. We have group projects. You have students working together on homework assignments. We have discussion. We have question answering. All of these are applicable in different contexts, in different ways, and have very different best practices. And I don't know when the edX platform will get there, but I see it as a very nice place to start exploring which kinds of social dynamics work in which place, how they work in which place. And what I was very excited about with the system is that it's, at least the goal is to build it in a fairly generic way, where many of those components will be useful for other types of systems. People will be able to experiment and say, gosh, this is the type of social affordance that's helpful for a humanities course in literature. Here's one for a course in electronics. Here's one for a advanced design course. And I think that those will end up with very different answers. So I actually do want to see that kind of competition, figure out what the core blocks that we need are, so we can plot together a whole range of very diverse social experiences.
Okay. Oh, Eric, yes.
One thing I just wanted to add. First of all, I want to say that your responses to my questions were certainly. I think that the notions of splitting up the questions and the discourse in terms of discussion and sort of being able to sort of get questions answered effectively and get deep discussion to happen in other places. All those are sort of well informed, and I like the direction that's heading. One interesting thing to look at is, even whether this be used in production or even in some testing, is whether if I ask a question and someone answers it, whether relationships develop between the person who asks the question and the answer, like maybe I just personal message that person next time if they give a really good answer. And thinking about some of those ways that those social interactions ultimately develop over time within there would be a really interesting thing to watch.
That's one of the biggest gaps that we have right now. We don't have a way for people to send messages to each other, and when you have 10,000 people in a social network, which our early courses had, or even 1,000, which our later courses have, it becomes very hard to get that kind of connection and social network. And finding ways to build it out, I think, would be a very nice next step. And the quick helper is a way that you can actually target people to people who they've spoken to. Hopefully that can do a little bit of that. But from there, there's a long ways to go. But I'll be very excited to see that.
One thing we were really surprised to see with an earlier MOOC study that we did was how excited people were when they had the opportunity to speak synchronously to one another. And one thing we saw in many of those chats were students exchanging contact information so they could continue to keep in touch throughout the course. And we weren't anticipating that it would make that much of a difference. On the negative side, it was interesting to see. We also followed up with some students who received requests through the help the quick helper and didn't respond, and well, why, what was your reason? We just were curious. And some responses were, well, I saw how that person was interacting with me on the discussion forum, and I just didn't think it was worth because they didn't seem like they took me seriously in the past. I was really surprised because we didn't think that in such a short course anyone would form a lasting impression of somebody who they had not met before, or that would take anything that happens on the discussion forum that personally. But it did seem like the feedback that we got from people was, in fact, their experience in the social environment of the MOOC was very real to them, and did leave an impression. And so I think even in a short time, those kinds of connections can have an impact and make a difference to people. So we want to make sure that it stays positive.
When we analyzed forum data, we found that there was sort of log linear response. The first 10 people, the next 100 people, the next 1,000 people, and so on and so forth, tended to be approximately equal. And the most active users gave a very strong feeling of community to a lot of courses, including our original course. But there's also a difference between, I think, is there a feeling like people? I know a certain number of very prominent people in the course, versus am I one of the people who other people know, versus am I participating at all? And that's something we actually have not looked at very much. And it'd be interesting to see, if you have some person who asks 1,000 stupid questions or a person who answers 1,000 brilliant questions, people will know that person, but I'm wondering whether that happens more broadly than that if you have that many people in a common area.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have done some research in other online community contexts where we've tried to kind of observe interactions between particular pairs of individuals who are active in the forum over time. And we do see evidence that it's not just those people at the top of your curve that are noticed, that others are noticed as well, especially in forums where there are topic spaces where it's not the whole forum, but it's the people who are within that space that they're recognized and they do have some presence. So, but I think how that plays out in these MOOCs, especially when people know that their participation in that course is short-lived, who are the people that stand out and why, and in what ways, I think that there can be a lot more interesting research on that. So I do think those are very interesting questions.
Just so you're aware for short-lived, the original 6WX for the Founding of edX, the servers went down, I guess, about 2 months ago. we had active users right through that point in the forums. The community stayed around for the close to 4 years.
Wow.
And it would have stayed around for a while longer if we didn't have the server, if we didn't take down the servers.
Well, I mean, even in our MOOC course, which was much shorter, we did see that, and I think it's even true still now, that new students come along each week. And so there is, and participate in the discussion forums, but the intensity is not the same as it was when the course was officially running. I don't know for this one course that you mentioned whether it stayed at that same level or if
lower. It's been going down over time, but
but it is interesting, and I have seen. So there are MOOCs that I have participated in and continue to go back to as resources, just because I really like how the instructors are teaching, and because I consider the material valuable and I enjoy listening to the videos. So, but in those courses, so despite the fact that I believe in discussion-based learning, tend not to participate in the discussion forums, but I do continue to go back to those courses. So we are coming to the end of our time, and it has been great to have our 3 panelists with us. Of course, this is being recorded, so we can go back to this, and I have been taking notes, and I encourage you to continue to send us your feedback. We are collaborating with all 3 of you, and we hope to continue our active collaboration with you. And yeah, so keep those comments coming, and we will continue to push forward. Like I said, this is really just a first step along the journey, and hopefully a path towards a future of more effective affordances for supporting community building and collaborative and discussion-based learning in MOOCs. So thank you once again. Happy holidays to all, and we will continue our Dance Online Talk series in the new year.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.